The following podcast deals with the controversial subject of marine mammals in captivity. In the 35-plus years that have passed since Marineland's closure, there's been a huge sea change in public opinion about this topic, and rightfully so. Throughout the course of this podcast, I hope to deal with these issues with honesty and sensitivity, while also acknowledging the tremendous awe, joy, and respect these animals have inspired in millions. And now, on with the show. On the 6th episode of LA's Own Marineland, we'll learn more about Orky and Corky from the Marinelanders who knew them best. We'll also recount the park's grand reopening / reimagining as Hanna-Barbera's Marineland in 1978. So grab your popcorn, walk up the zigzag ramp past the oval fish tank, and make your way to the Killer Whale Coliseum to get a good seat before the show starts. But before you sit down, there is one warning. If you're listening to this podcast in the first 5 rows, you will get wet. You may get soaked.
Seven-tenths of our world is covered with water. In Los Angeles, there's a place that overlooks this vast frontier. A place of wilderness. A place of drama. Hold your breath. It's Marineland. Plummet into global oceans teeming with life. Go eye to glowing eye with predators of the deep. Venture into a realm as intriguing as outer space. All a touch closer at LA's Own Marineland.
As we ended the last episode, the future of Marineland was clouded by uncertainty as the cities of Rolling Hills Estates and Rancho Palos Verdes slow-walked their approvals for the first phase of a $2.5 million improvement project. The municipalities were concerned about an increase in traffic, energy consumption, and the environmental impact of construction. By February 1978, this dispute was still in the air, and officials were unsure what condition the park would be in when it reopened for the summer season. They hoped to reopen by early May, but revised their timetables to open at latest the end of the month. 4 months into the park's closure, they had done some, quote, general sprucing up to make the park look nicer and, quote, run a lot better. But the project wasn't near where it was supposed to be. Eventually, the stalemate was settled. The city of Rancho Palos Verdes approved Phase 1 of its renovations, but any future updates to the park would require Marineland to file a full environmental report. Now the park was free to start on the first phase of refurbishment, which was obviously a relief to management. It was also a godsend to the animals who had become, quote, depressed, and thought they were being punished as months passed without any visitors. To keep the animals busy, the park had to bus in groups of school kids so they would have someone to perform for. The stress that was placed on the animals would come to a head on Wednesday, May 3rd, 1978. The story of Orky the killer whale and 27-year-old Marineland trainer Jill Stratton is the subject of a lot of urban legends. I remember as a kid growing up in the South Bay hearing about how a woman was almost eaten by one of the whales. I also heard many different and conflicting versions of the story from the Marinelanders I interviewed for the show, so I was a little unsure about how to describe what really happened. So I decided to go with the version of the story told by Southern California's paper of record, the Los Angeles Times. As the story goes, Stratton was trying new training techniques with Orky after a period of time when the whales hadn't had much human interaction. Stratton got in the water and was straddling Orky when he tossed her off his back and dragged her to the bottom of the 22-foot tank. Then, in what must have been one of the most intensely frightening moments of Stratton's life, he maneuvered above her and gently pressed her to the bottom of the tank. Imagine the fear of not only drowning, but being crushed by a 25-foot-long, 14,000-pound orca. Then, quote, like a cat playing with a mouse, he let her float up several times, but also caught her before she reached the surface and pulled her down again. This went on for 4 minutes. It probably felt like an eternity. Stratton was struggling to breathe, so Tom Otten, head curator of marine mammals, and his assistant Brad Andrews dove into the tank and swam to her aid. Corky also came to the rescue. Andrews climbed atop Orky, and maneuvered him away from Stratton. Otten grabbed the unconscious woman and pulled her onto Corky's back. Corky carried Otten and Stratton to the edge of the tank. 18 horrified school children were at the park that day, and they helped drag Stratton's unconscious body out of the water. She was administered CPR and brought back to consciousness. Paramedics arrived and brought her to Torrance Memorial Hospital, where she made a full recovery and vowed to ride Orky again. A spokesperson for Marineland said that Orky was now in, quote, solitary confinement, and no one was going near him for 3 days. While in the hospital, the trainer was asked why the whale did what he did. I guess, she joked, he just overestimated how long I could hold my breath. More seriously, she added, it was the first time in, quote, months and months that anyone had ridden the whale. Maybe he didn't like it. As for her return, she said she was going to play it by ear. Gail Lawley, marine mammal trainer from 1978 to 87.
Well, it's interesting because Jill was my friend. I actually ended up replacing her. She's the one that got me into Marineland.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I was, this incident happened before I was hired, and it was an incident with Orky. And this is where you had the information about what Orky liked and didn't like, and the fact that he was this proud bull. And if you think about it, that one round pool, that was his territory.
Yeah.
Okay? This was his. And ours was all the land around it. And so he had a habit of controlling that territory, and rightly so, by intimidating trainers when he had the opportunity, which, of course, he had the opportunity when he went in the water with him.
Yeah.
And so he would do things like, and again, this was before my time, but I learned and heard enough stories from everybody that experienced it. Like you'd be riding on his back during a show, and just coming around the last turn, and it was time to jump off his back onto the platform, and he'd do a little detour and head to the middle of the pool, and then wouldn't let you leave.
Oh, geez.
And he wouldn't let you leave till he would let you leave. And occasionally, during those times, he would swim over the top of you and dunk you underwater.
Oh, geez.
But what was interesting about it, he would never, ever stop you from coming back up. I mean, he wasn't trying to drown you, but he was trying to intimidate you. And so you just have to, swim around and get to the surface and take a breath, and it might happen again. But that was an MO of his, his way of, I think, to me, saying, this is not, I don't agree with this, with what's happening here. And so that's basically what happened to Jill. And this was, of course, while the park was closed, and they were doing a training session, and he dunked her. And I think, but I don't, it's maybe too presumptive of me, but I think that one of the things about Orky was he relied on you to make a decision to take care of yourself. Mm-hmm. In other words, if you tried to swim to the surface, like I said, he never stopped you. So I don't know exactly what happened, but I think that Jill just didn't quite get to the surface in time, but I don't think it's because he was stopping her. And she passed out. And I think, and I assume you've talked to others, but apparently there was some visitors that day, some kids that had just done a CPR course. Mm-hmm. They basically saved her life.
Wow.
Before the paramedics got there. So she recovered, and she did go back to work for a period of time, but she just never really, I think she just never really felt quite comfortable enough about things. And so when she quit, she helped me get an interview, and I have to say, I worked harder to get that job than I ever have. So I'm not talking about myself very well, but yeah, she helped me get the job there.
It's unclear what Orky's motive was for nearly killing Stratton. Was he bored? Having fun? Unaware of the danger she was in? Or was it an act of aggression at a time when he was stressed due to changes in the environment because of the park's temporary closure? Whatever the case, the incident would completely change how trainers interacted with the orcas, especially Orky, in the future. On May 27, 1978, the park reopened with a new name, Hanna-Barbera's Marineland. One of the most notable changes was a big upgrade in the flora and fauna. As part of the park's $2.5 million refurbishment, the entrance was relocated. Previously, visitors walked through the turnstile and looked directly at the main building's 40-foot-high wall. Now, the entrance was moved to the south, near the Sky Tower, where people walked in through a lush greenhouse and small forest of trees. Also, in the new layout, visitors had more access to the cliff sides to get a better view of the majestic Pacific Ocean and Catalina Island. Michael Jett, manager of general services in Baja Reef from 1977 to 87.
The entrance was completely changed in that the entrance under Hanna-Barbera was closer to the ocean, whereas under 20th Century, it was kind of in the middle of the west side of the park and the main driveway coming down. I know it's hard to visualize that, but so there were some significant physical changes to the park under Hanna-Barbera. But again, you had Yogi Bear, the Flintstones, and all that stuff. So it was really exciting for the kids and the adults with kids to see that.
Under Hanna-Barbera, there were also more corporate events at the park. Ed Capel, Marineland's group sales manager from 1979 to 87.
We were the first theme park in California to do corporate and group picnics.
Oh.
And so we initially had a small area over by the Galley West restaurant, and that we improved, and we could do corporate events, group events up to about 300 in that site. And then we improved. The demand was such that we decided, and we wanted to get bigger events. We decided to improve the opposite end of the park, the Palisades Picnic Park, put in grass and put in horseshoes and volleyball and just a lot of stuff that's typical of picnics. And we were able to do picnics in that area up to, I think the largest we did was maybe 3,000, 3,500, somewhere in that event, somewhere in that range. And it worked because people, we, at any given time, we could seat like probably 1,500 people in the picnic area. But not everybody in a company picnic that large is going to want to sit down and eat at the same time.
Yeah.
And so, with the flow that naturally happens, we had a strategy, a structure that worked well for the space we were trying to do. And we were able to, at times, include other attractions like Baja Reef if companies wanted to, add additional, benefits as part of their picnic.
The new owners also changed how the park operated from a business perspective.
So I was brought in right as they were getting ready to reopen the park, in the capacity as organizational sales rep. And then coming into sales, they really tried to get us to market the park. Taft was an East Coast theme park operator. That's what they owned. They had their fingers in a number of other businesses, but they tried to get us to go ahead and manage group sales the way they managed their other parks, and which was very, very different because their other parks were less seasonal than Marineland. Marineland, aside from like spring, summer, and early fall, our attendance really drops off a cliff. And so they were, having group sales just strictly focus on shoulder season and not allowing us to sell anything for the summer events. So we were putting in all this work, and we'd have these shoulder season events, and the turnout, the attendance was terrible because people didn't want to come to the park when it was cold. And so eventually they started looking at capacity, and they realized that the park was not running at capacity during the peak summer months, so why not go ahead and use group sales throughout that time as well to bolster it? And so we started doing group events. I pioneered a park sellout program, and I had to try and guide accounting on just kind of a step at a time, so that, you know, at the end of the day, they would buy into what I wanted to do, and I got them to agree to giving a price for a park sellout. And then I said, well, that's going to be a tall climb for a single company to do. How about we break that in and let companies share it, break it down into 3. And so then we did that. And I said, that's still going to be a tall climb for a lot of companies. Why don't we go ahead and break it down into blocks of 100 and go ahead and allow a lot of companies to share it? And so that eventually brought the price down from a group standpoint to a level that was really attractive for companies. And so we started doing that as a consignment ticket program.
With the park's new look, its graphic design changed as well. Linda Malik, marketing director from 1979 to 87, helped create its iconic new logos. Now, do you know what that font is called? Because that is a beautiful font in that 80s logo.
You know, the blue, just the Marineland.
Yeah.
You know what? It's not a font. We created it.
Okay.
We didn't like any of the fonts. Frankly, yeah. Now that I'm thinking about this, oh my gosh, you're just digging through. I'm digging through the memories when we created that, and the little icon with the dolphin with the multi-blue color dolphin. We got so many awards for that because it was almost a little too contemporary at the time, but it was very kind of cutting edge. And we did the iconic piece first, and then created sort of the logotype to go with it.
Oh, wow. Maybe that's why it's such a unique thing when you look at it, and it's so memorable, because it's not like anything you've seen before.
Right. And you can't find it on your list on the computer. Yeah.
Yeah. I know. I was trying to build a website for this, and I was like, oh, what the heck?
It doesn't exist. Yeah.
Well, geez, okay. I'm gonna have to find the original artist and pay them $20,000 to get that done. The new Marineland also featured costume characters. At Disneyland, one could hang out with Mickey Mouse and Snow White. At Marineland, they could now pal around with a life-size Yogi Bear and Huckleberry Hound. Why they'd be hanging out at a marine park is anyone's guess, but it was fun anyway. The park also opened a marine animal care center to help injured or sick animals that were brought to the park. For the kids, there was a new play area called Fred Flintstone's Fun Factory. The park also added a theater where people could watch Hanna-Barbera's iconic animation. The new upgrades also included a 34-aquarium display of invertebrates and fish called Passages Beneath the Sea. The new upgrades were exciting, but Phase 2 of the park's expansion would be even more incredible. Hanna-Barbera planned to build a fleet of tall ships anchored near the park's pier in a traditional Mediterranean-style seaport village with artificial tide pools. However, these plans were scrapped due to cost and logistical troubles with the ships. As with everything at Marineland, it was always 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Now, 6 episodes into the podcast, I'd like to finally introduce you to the stars of our show, Orky and Corky.
It's showtime, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and welcome to the Top Deck and the Killer Whale Coliseum. Now, in this tank, you'll notice we have 2 black and white animals. Both of these are killer whales. We have 1 male in the tank and also a female. Our male is the one that took the great big bow for you at the start of the show, and his name is Orky. At the far side of the tank, we have Orky's girlfriend, Corky. Now, both Orky and Corky were caught up in Pandora Harbor, British Columbia. Now, these whales talk to each other through a series of clicks, squawks, squeaks, and whistles. The sound that they make does not come out the open mouth. It comes out the hole that's located on top of their head. Our trainers like to listen in each show, so we invite you to listen as they talk with their trainers. talking whales, Orky and Corky.
Marineland trainer Tim Desmond worked with both whales for 12 years and understood their unique personalities. First, let's start with Orky. The 14,000-pound, 25-foot-long bull was the more imposing of the two. He was known to be proud, moody, and not given to displays of playfulness. If Orky felt like intimidating someone, he would show them a bloodshot eye. Marineland trainer Tim Desmond worked with both whales for 12 years and understood their unique personalities. Here's an excerpt from Eye to Eye with an Orca by Desmond, taken from the October 1982 edition of Animal Kingdom magazine, published by the New York Zoological Society.
The red eye, as we call it, signals anger, sometimes surprise. The key was realizing that if intimidation proved unsuccessful, Orky would cooperate, taking the path of least resistance. Like a picture painted by numbers, these experiences have given me a sense of Orky's personality. He is proud, with a strong need to control his environment. He's not only a fast learner, but an adept game player. He also has an excellent memory, easily recalling tricks he hasn't performed in a year or more. He needs intellectual stimulation, and, though he's only occasionally playful, positive support from people. Despite his gruff demeanor, he has a sensitive, even fragile side. Finally, he's shown great awareness, tolerance, and patience towards Corky, his mate.
Gail Lawley, a mammal trainer at Marineland for 8.5 years, worked closely with the orcas for 4, had a lot to say about Orky. You've heard her on the podcast already, but here's an excerpt for her talking about Orky from the book The Parrot's Lament by Eugene Linden. Lawley says that Orky was the most intelligent animal she's ever worked with, and he commanded respect. If it was not forthcoming, there were 4 levels of irritation. First, his eyes would turn red. Then he might spit a bit of water at you. If he didn't get the message, he would set his chin on the trainer platform and pump his tail to say, "I could get you if I wanted to." If that didn't get the point across, he'd spit even more violently. But after a tantrum, he'd always calm down and then return to the trainers for a back rub. Tim Desmond had a lot to say about Corky as well.
Corky, who's half her mate's size, is more lighthearted, but can be just as testy. With a new trainer, she will at first be shy and standoffish. She requires a lot of attention, and once she gets it, she becomes playful. Corky also enjoys a form of hide-and-seek. The tank is ringed with 3 tiers of windows, some open to public viewing, and some adjacent to offices and storage rooms. The whales can see through these as well as we can. At the slight tap of my whistle on a window, Corky will come from anywhere in the tank to that exact spot. Quite a display of her sonar ability. Then, running from level to level or room to room, I hide in another window. She almost always finds me. All of her trainers know these games, and Corky is ever alert to the chance to play. When a trainer approaches the tank railing, she races over and thrusts her pectoral fin into the air, her signal that it's time for fun. Corky's ability to learn is nothing short of unbelievable. Aside from responding very rapidly to formal training, she imitated all tricks Orky had been taught, and she hadn't. On the other hand, Corky may refuse to perform if a trainer's not being friendly enough. When this happens, no amount of discipline can get her to work. Asked to describe Corky's personality, I would say she's intelligent, alert, and extremely sensitive. She needs a tremendous amount of affection from people, but she has great patience, endurance, and resilience. If you cross her, she can be stubborn and exasperating, but she'd really rather play.
Gail Lawley.
Well, she was, like I said, she was outgoing. She had a really, very energetic, totally into people interactions. I mean, she loved attention. You could play with her, you could jump on her back, you could ride her around, you could, interact with. I mean, unfortunately, we had limited ways we could interact in the size of the enclosure.
Yeah.
But she really, really loved personal attention.
Orky and Corky lived in the same tank together for nearly 20 years, so their personalities were intricately interwoven. Bud Crames, a killer whale trainer at Marineland from 1984 to 87, was very familiar with how the two worked together.
And the situation with that park is that both whales were in the same pool the whole time. So unlike at SeaWorld where you could separate them and work individual animals, we had to work them together. So their personalities would play off each other. If one of them was not paying attention, the other one might not. So you had to find ways to coordinate them and then to get them working. And, obviously male and female that have been together for so many years, they were pretty much in tune to each other.
Jim Roop, the live events director from 1980 to 84, has a great way of explaining their relationship.
Orky was the man, but you ever hear the expression, if you want to talk to the man in charge, he's right in here. If you want to talk to the person who knows what's going on, see the woman in the outer office. So Orky was in charge, if you will, but Corky knew what was going on. And the interaction between those two was pretty intense. They were obviously mates for life. They worked well together. They interacted together. It was always fun in the morning when I would go to set everything up. And I'd be there very early in the morning, long before the park would open. And to just see them swimming around in the tank and how they interacted with each other, you can tell what season it was. They would be a little more frisky with each other, or they were just best friends. Definite personalities between the two. And the personality between Orky and Corky when you would show up. Like if I would go to the top deck as I was going up to the sound booths or whatever, and you walk around the tank and you wave to them, and they'd come over and they'd take that lean, and so one eye would be looking at you as they would swim around and follow you around the tank. You knew that they knew you. Wow. It was just crazy, that look in their eye. And you could tell when it was okay to reach out. Maybe they would lift up their pectoral fin, or you could tell when you shouldn't, based on that look you got from them. It wasn't just dark, empty eyes that were staring at you. There was personality in there. There was a living, breathing, beautiful creature of God staring right back at you with a brain and central nervous system and a personality and wants and needs. I mean, you can tell it. Just being in their presence, you could tell it. And I'm not this, tree-hugging animal lover, but you can't help but just be in awe of how expressive they are and just how interactive they are. And the fact that they knew me, wow, was really an honor.
Now, what did the look in the eye look like if it was not a good day to get a pectoral wave?
It looked a little blank, I don't know if you're married or not, but
I am.
Those who are married, when you walk in the room and you catch your wife's eye, when you should just be quiet and just go get your beer or do whatever you're going to do and then go watch the game, or just, those times. And it was just like that. I mean, I wish I could articulate better, but you just knew, it's almost like their eyes would smile. Wow. When you knew it was the right time. There was a little bit of a lift, there was a little bit of a squint, if you will, when their eyes were wide in staring. That was when I would just go, okay, I'm just going to go put the microphones out and I'm done with you guys. I'll talk to you later. It was that kind of relationship. I think I respected them quite a bit. And I would hope that they recognized that and respected me for it. I don't know. It's very strange.
One of the things that I loved about their relationship, the two of them, Orky and Corky, were like a married couple. Orky was clearly dominant. And there was times, this is one of the things about, learning about the subtleties of dealing with animals as individuals. So Orky was very dominant, and there was times when we were quite convinced that he was, for example, stopping her from participating in a show. You'd be out there on the platform ready to go, and there's Orky all lined up and ready to work, and where's Corky? Can't find her anywhere, and she was at the far end of the pool or sitting at the windows or whatever. And one of the things we realized about them is that, dominance is a normal part of any social being, but it can also be very subtle. And so we learned that we had to make a educated guess as to what was going on. Because Corky loved to work. She would always be there in training sessions and shows, whatever. But she was also a bit, I don't know, how would I describe? Maybe, I'm not sure exactly what the word is, but sometimes she just kind of wanted to do her own thing too, right? Yeah. So if she didn't show up for at showtime, you had to make an educated guess. Okay, was this Corky being Corky, as it, I'm just going to kind of do my thing for a bit, or was this Orky putting subtle, control on her and telling her, don't show up?
Oh.
And so, based on your guess, how you dealt with Orky determined what happened next. So if your guess was this was just Corky being herself and she'd show up eventually, then we would do the show with him, and he'd do a behavior, he'd get reinforced appropriately. But if our guess was that it was him stopping her from showing up, then we wouldn't reinforce him.
Oh.
So we would ask him to work, but when he came back, you might just look at him and give him a thumbs up or whatever, but you wouldn't reinforce him. And if we guessed right, within 2 or 3 behaviors, Corky would show up.
Oh.
However, if we thought he was pressuring her, and so we kind of put a little pressure on him, and we guessed wrong, he kind of got pissed off.
Oh. You said,
Yeah.
why am I getting blamed, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so, he had this way of, he could put pressure on the platform. He could just put his chin on the platform. It would start to sink.
Oh, no.
Or he'd kind of push against the platform. He'd pump a little bit with his tail, and you could tell right away, and his eyes go red. So we go, okay, sorry, wrong guess. Carry on, and then we would just apologize and start reinforcing him.
Wow.
Anyway, that was the dynamics between them. But when Corky was pregnant, the dynamics completely switched. And she could do whatever she wanted to do, and Orky let her.
Wow.
It was pretty amazing.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
The whales also had a way of negotiating with one another.
If Orky didn't want to perform, he would make sure Corky didn't want to perform either. Not that he was a bully, but there was a solidarity there, You could tell when the trainers would try to get the Orky and Corky to come up to the platform and target on their fist, put their nose to their fist, meaning that the animals are now ready to do something. Orky would turn to his left to Corky, and Corky would then kind of swipe her head to the left as if to say, okay, and she decided she would not perform either. So he said, well, we're going to do this together, right? Yes, we are, honey. Okay, then let's just relax. This is our time off, and we'll make them know this is our time off. It was great. I loved it.
The dynamics between the trainers and the orcas was a beautiful dance.
The dynamics were dynamic, for lack of a better word. And if you hung around long enough, if you were there every day, it didn't take long, but if you're there every day for a period of time, you kind of understood how it worked. It was quite the dance between the humans that worked there, especially the trainers. The trainers were just amazing at the relationship they had with the animals, the mutual respect, the understanding that went along with it. When the trainers knew when to pull buckets back, or when they knew to go ahead and try a behavior again, you just learned so much. Some of my favorite shows are when the animals didn't perform. When they didn't, how sometimes you just don't want to go to work?
Yeah.
Well, sometimes that's how the animals were. And they just didn't want to do it. And the greatest shows were in that cat and mouse game between the trainer and the animal.
Oh.
And the first person who moves loses. So the animals always won. Animals always won. But it's that kind of stuff that was just crazy. And that's when you knew that was Orky's tank. If Orky didn't want to work, you can try all you want. You can show him the biggest mackerel on the planet, biggest tuna, shove it right in and say, look what I got, a big tuna. If he didn't want to do anything, hungry or not, he's not going to do it. And you got to respect that and say, okay, we'll come back at the 11 o'clock show and see how you feel then. But it was really, really cool. They never let the animals starve, don't get me wrong. But it was just an amazing interaction in cat and mouse game. Is some of those times when the animals wouldn't perform, and the way the trainers would explain everything to the people, because folks would get in, they want to see this, they want to see that. If the animals aren't performing, it's a little disappointing.
Yeah.
But the way the trainers were able to express what was going on, why it was happening, you kind of go, wow, these aren't just pets here.
Yeah.
You know, these are living, breathing creatures, as I said before, that have personalities and wants and needs, and you got to respect that. And I think that was a beautiful part of that park, is the respect between the trainers and the animals. The trainers knew what they could do and how far to go. The animals knew how to push back too, and the fact that they were able to articulate that to the crowds that would come made it all the better. And I think people got a better appreciation of the majesty of these animals because of situations like that. But those are some of the best shows for me, was when the animals wouldn't cooperate.
Elisa Mitchell, who worked in guest relations and as a costume character in the 80s.
It always seemed like Orky was playing a lot more games, and just, there was a lot of, at the shows, just kind of doing what was being asked of him, but trying to get a little bit more out of it. Just try to take it in another direction is what I kind of remember, being the dude, I guess.
Ed Capel.
You have to understand what happens to, any, even human beings when you have hormones raging. You start asserting your dominance, and that was definitely his tank, and he saw it as his tank, and he wanted to control what happened in that tank. Trainers would always try and be keenly aware of, how he was feeling and in regard to, what they did and how they did it. And it was a deep level of respect with both Orky and Corky, with all of our animals, really.
Tracy Belting, who worked at the park from 1976 to 87, finishing in the animal care department.
I just remember when they were having orca calves, when we would be on these 24-hour watches, and I was on the team that was doing some of the watches overnight when we would think that she was getting ready to deliver. And, as you know, none of those calves survived, but it wasn't for lack of intervention and trying. There were a couple of times I got to be on the team that would go in. We'd tube feed the calves milk.
Oh, wow.
And you would, bring the calf over. You could lower the pool, and there were these different little shallow spots. So the whales would still be in deep water, but we'd be on like a lip that was around the outside of the pool and holding the calf and what have you. And I just remember doing that and having Orky kind of swim up to watch what was happening. And it felt like a 747 plane was coming up behind you. He was so big. He was just so big. They had him at over 12,000 pounds.
Yeah.
He was just a huge animal. So I remember that, just, being a brand new animal care person and holding this little, baby killer whale for the tube feedings and having this huge 747 plane kind of docked behind me watching the whole thing. It was amazing.
You may have noticed this show has no advertising. Well, kind of like PBS, we're relying on our listeners to support our efforts to preserve Marineland's history through this podcast, which has taken countless hours to produce. There are two ways you can help. First, you can make a donation to the show through PayPal by clicking on the donate button on our website at marinelandpodcast.com. That's marinelandpodcast.com. Or you can take a deeper dive into Marineland's history by becoming a Patreon subscriber. At patreon.com/marinelandpodcast, you can listen to full interviews with 19 people closest to the park. You'll also get the Patreon exclusive episode, Making Marineland, where I share the backstory of how this podcast came to be. It's all just $5.99 a month. Get started at patreon.com/marinelandpodcast. Thanks for your support. Now back to the show. Larry Clark, head trainer from 1959 to 69.
I used to ride Orky down there until he came after me.
Oh.
In a show, yeah. See, you never know what happens if the animals get some bad food. Sometimes the animals don't want to perform. And for whatever reason, you don't know. Maybe because the kids would throw stuff at them. People would drop stuff accidentally into the pool. in the mornings you get there, you see the dolphins in the big oval or round pool, and they would be with coins in their mouth, and they let the coins go, and they would follow them down towards the floor, and then take them up to the surface, and so they just had toys that they were entertaining themselves with. Like I said, I don't know if Orky had gotten some bad food that day or whatever, but I got on his back to ride him, and he didn't want to come over to the side of the pool. And then he finally came over, and I got on him. And instead of, normally he would do 2 laps around the circumference of the pool, he went down and then came right up the middle of the pool. And you can see their eyes, when their eyes get just open up really big, and all you can see is red. Mm-hmm. You know that you're in deep kimchi. And so I kept patting him on his back and rubbing his back, and he just kind of drifted with the current up to the other end of the pool. On his side, his dorsal fin was in the water, so I had to scoot up to stay on him. And then he got up towards that end, and then he kind of righted himself and came around where I originally got on him. One of the other trainers was there and saw that I was in trouble. So I jumped off towards the wall, and he grabbed me by the back of my wetsuit, the collar and my butt, and threw me over the wall.
Wow.
And Orky went down and came up snapping. I told the curator, Dave Brown, at that time, I said, I'm not doing this shit no more. Wow. I said, it's a typical male. Males of any species can be nasty. Well, I mean, females can too, but generally the males are the ones that you're going to have problems with. So he came after me, and I never rode him again.
Mark Grindle, who worked in guest relations in the early 80s.
Well, it was, the trainers were used to that, and there were lots of times, countless times, when Orky or Corky would decide that they just were not going to participate, or they weren't going to pay attention, and so the trainer would do this big build up to they're going to jump up out of the center of the tank and touch the ball up in the air, and the whale would just swim around. Or they would interfere with each other. So if one of them was going to do a breach where they would swim around the tank a couple of times and then jump out, the other whale sometimes didn't want them to do it, and they would just kind of ram into them and interrupt the show. So that happened, probably a couple times a week as far as I know. I remember it happening a lot, though.
Michael Jett.
So I'd be up there regularly. So even though I wasn't a trainer, there were times that I would walk up there and there's nobody else around, and either Orky or Corky would follow me as I'm walking around the tank. Mm. And that's very cool. But, you're right. They had various personalities, and sometimes they would perform as we hoped and expected, and sometimes they wouldn't. They had their personalities, and they would sometimes say, well, you know what? I'm not going to perform today or perform this show. And the trainers who worked with them day in and day out could tell what type of mood they were in, and they had no problem, stopping a show. If Orky is going to misbehave, they would stop a show.
Orky and Corky obviously lived in unnatural conditions for killer whales. But one wonders, did they understand what was happening around them?
Do you think they got what was going on, that they were entertaining people, or were they intentionally show people, or do you get where I'm going?
Yeah, that's obviously a tough question to answer, because I'm not in the head of the animals, especially Orky and Corky, but I think to a degree they knew exactly what their role was, what their job was, what the situation was all about. And I think that they enjoyed, I know this is very strange to say, and it's going to sound like I'm wacky, but I really think that they enjoyed showing people what you can't normally see. Mm. Most of those people, you can't see it. How often do you see a killer whale? Really, right? Never. So I think to a degree they sort of enjoyed showing off. Say, this is who we are, man. And there's thousands and thousands of us out there. And aren't we wonderful? And thank you for coming and letting us show you how wonderful we are. I really believe there was some sort of understanding that they had that role to help educate people about who they are and about their brothers and sisters in the wild. And I think I forgot about, you're right. Thanks for bringing up the relationship between the audience and the animals. I think they definitely understood that.
Did they enjoy performing?
I believe so. I mean, this is an opinion. You know, you can't really identify joy or anger really in an animal. It's how they respond. They obviously they're working for food and they're working for affection, and we try to give them both, a combination of the two. And if you can find a good balance where they're not just working for food, they're working for you or working with you, I guess would be a better term. That's good. And obviously, an animal that size, if they don't want to do something, they won't do it. I mean, you can't force them to do it. So the fact that the show went on and the training went on, you got to assume that there's some pleasure in it. In the past, I've always compared it to a child that grows up in rural area in the mountains and never goes to school. They're happier than anything running around. But a child going to school, are they happy too? Yeah. So you can't really compare one versus the other. You know, there's joy in life, basically. When I went to Marinelanders, my first opportunity to do the high jump tower, where you climb up the tower and put the fish in your mouth, and then they come up and Corky comes up and grabs it out of your mouth. And talk about that's coming at you like a 747 right at your face. And then that's impressive. Plus, they're just their mere size. I mean, it's unbelievable. But more impressive than their bodies and their size, I think, is their brain. The ability to learn, to see them, take small steps that you're providing them and to seem to understand it and get new behaviors that way. And it's very inspiring.
Marineland's small orca take was completely inadequate, but it gave visitors an incredible close-up view of these impressive animals.
But when you were there at Marineland, it was like you were right next to the animal. It was like you were not that far.
Yeah, that's a great point. The intimacy of the park itself, and you're right. When you're standing up at the tank and you're looking into it, waiting for one of the whales to come up, and then when they do breach the surface with their head, and they open that blowhole to take a breath, and they announce themselves, when that breath of air comes out, I got goosebumps right now. I mean, I know you remember that because you cannot help but go, whoa, when they stick their head out of the water and that blowhole opens up and that big breath of air. It's just beautiful.
It was such a small tank too that made them look even larger, I think. Not that they weren't large, of course, but yeah, you were right there when you were walking, out of the stadium. You weren't separated by anything other than like a 4-foot wall and a pole, and so you couldn't stick your hand down in the water and touch it. But you were right on top of them, whereas SeaWorld, even though it's got an elevated glass area or viewing area around it, you still seem like you're far away. And I think at SeaWorld, they put the whales away. They go into those side tanks, whereas at Marineland, they were stuck in that round tank, so it was real easy to get intimate with them and just see them up close.
No Orky and Corky show would be complete without the audience getting doused with water.
Yeah, I think you always get those people that don't think they're going to get wet. You can warn them all you want that this is the splash zone. These first 5 rows, there's a real potential you're going to get wet. Yeah, right. How bad could it possibly be? Well, when a 7-ton killer whale flies up in the air and comes right back down in the water, there's a lot of water that's displaced from that tank. So it's pretty incredible to see the look on their faces, and then they have to spend the rest of the day as that salt water dries on them to walk around like a glazed donut, because that's how they're going to look the rest of the day. That's funny when they realize that, they're not kidding, and then people hightail it up to the top of the arena, and then the kids who are just dying to get wet, and they're the ones who never do. They're standing there waiting to get wet, and then the whale will breach in another spot. You go, oh man! So the kids are running around trying to get wet. It's very, very funny. But the reaction of the people just when the animals come out of the water and they realize, wow, look how big they are. They're big in the tank. You can, and when you go down underneath, and you could see the animals, Orky and Corky, swimming around in the tank through the windows in the tank below, and they look big because the window sort of magnifies a little bit. But when they come out of the water, that's when you get the real look at how huge they are. And when they come, and people, it's just this big gasp. Whoa! You know, when they first come out, and then that splash down, it's scatter for the hills as the water comes flying over the rail. It's just beautiful.
One of the behaviors one winter we were training is when Orky squirt water out of his mouth or spray water out of us, whatever you call it, it was a fan, 10 feet wide and just go 4 rows up into the stands. And so we said, let's put this on a hand signal and have him do it at a particular location. So we came up with the idea of, we took a broom and put a raincoat on it and a hat and sunglasses, and we would set it anywhere around the park, around the pool. And so we say, Orky, go squirt. We called him Mr. Happy, go squirt Mr. Happy. And he would go and look for Mr. Happy standing along the railing, and he would squirt him. And it got pretty reliable. But then in the summertime, when the place was packed, all the seats were taken, people would crowd around the railings right by the trainers area. And so we'd send that behavior, but Orky would look for Mr. Happy on the railing, and he'd see all these people on the railing, and he would sit there and just lambaste them. And the thing is, we couldn't reinforce it because it wasn't exactly what we wanted, so we had to let it see itself out. So he could do 3 or 4 or 5 squirts in a row, and that was kind of funny for us. I don't know what it was for the people, but we enjoyed it.
Oh, I love it. That's amazing.
Yeah. And of course, like I said, the tail whip was incredible because people would not know that's coming, and then it was just send a wall of water over them. That's pretty fun.
The guests weren't the only people getting splashed.
We all have stories about that. And my story, which is very short, is it was my first week that I was working in the park, and I was getting a variety of tours from different people. And this tour in particular, I was getting from one of our curators, Peter Noah. And Peter took me to the top deck to kind of introduce me to Orky and Corky and all of that. And I remember this like it was yesterday. I was talking to Peter. I had my back to the pool. And we were chatting, and he was walking away from me, backing up further away from the pool. And I'm like, this is very weird. He's, just kind of walking away, and we're still talking. And it wasn't, 10 seconds later that, Orky or one of them breached, and I got soaking wet. And he sat there in hysterics laughing. He says, well, you've been, that's your initiation.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, that was a great one.
That's all for now. But before you exit the gates, be sure to get your hand stamp so you can come back through the turnstile without having to buy another ticket. On the next episode, Marineland debuts one of its most forward-thinking and exciting attractions yet, the Baja Reef. But would it be enough to keep the park competitive? LA's Own Marineland was written, produced, and hosted by Todd Perry. That's me. But this wouldn't be possible without the help of a wonderful group of Marinelanders who shared their incredible stories. This episode featured the voice talents of Mark Chambers. For more information, references, and to support the show, visit marinelandpodcast.com and follow us on Twitter at MarinelandLAPod. Please be sure to sign up for our Patreon page, where you can learn even more about the history of Marineland by listening to full interviews with 19 people closest to the park. You'll also get the Patreon-exclusive episode, Making Marineland, that tells the backstory of how this podcast came to be. Get over 15 hours of fun for just $5.99 a month. Get started at patreon.com/MarinelandPodcast. That's patreon.com/MarinelandPodcast.